All right, live on the desk now is Shadow Communications Minister Melissa McIntosh. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
I thought we'd be talking all about Optus. We will talk about that, but we have to start with Andrew Hastie. I'm sure you can understand. Now, you're a close colleague of Susan Lee. Why did she find it necessary to write these charter letters? Because that's usually reserved for Prime Ministers, not shadows.
Yeah, it's a first time for me, but I've only been in Shadow Cabinet for a short period since just before the election. And it's part of normal organisational process, really. So if you're in the private sector, you get a charter letter. If you're in a government department. So I think it's pretty appropriate. I won't go into the detail, but just lays out some of the expectations based on conversations, and it just makes it clear what the KPIs are and what we should deliver policy-wise, which is important because a lot of Australians said we lacked policy intent at the last election.
Has it backfired here, though?
In regards to Andrew, who was speaking, well, I think Andrew made his point clear, and I'm a good friend of Andrew's. I think he's wonderful, and he's been very supportive of me during my career as well. So I'm not going to say anything against Andrew, but he made his point clear on why he couldn't stay in Shadow Cabinet because of the Westminster system. He's quite traditional, and that's his decision that he's made, and he's alone.
Is there anything? What's been reported is that he says, look, Paul Scar has main carriage over immigration. Is there anything like that in your charter letter which delineates some part of your portfolio to someone else?
Not in my portfolio. There's a Shadow Regional Communications Minister who I work really closely with, Anne Webster, she's a Nat. And there's other crossover areas like AI I'll work closely.
Well, is that in your letter, that sort of detail?
There's consistent detail across the letters based on the conversation with the leader.
You've got some heavy hitters on the sidelines now, don't you? Andrew Hastie just sent a price Jane Hume. It's got to be a problem for Susan Lee, doesn't it?
I would much prefer that my colleagues were back in Shadow Cabinet. Andrew makes such a strong contribution. He's done great work for our party, but he's made his decision. I don't think, and he's not indicated that there's any other intent behind it except for not being able to voice his opinions on immigration. I can feel that for him because I come from an outer metro seat where high immigration is putting pressure on infrastructure. Infrastructure costs are out of control. Our hospitals are bursting at the seams. Major roads around Western Sydney International Airport have potholes on them still. So I can see why he has this as an issue. It's important to his community, it's important to my community. The
feeling is from sections of the right that Paul Scar's too dripping wet on this issue. Is that right?
I don't believe that he is. He's a great guy. I work really closely with Paul on a number of things. I think he's a decent and very, well-regarded shadow minister.
Do you think Andrew Hastie should sort of put up or shut up in terms if he is interested in the leadership here?
Why does he need to do that? It's part of the great nature of the Liberal Party that we do get to have individual thought and the freedom to speak, but we need to be on the backbench to do that.
You could describe the actions of Hastie Price as ill-disciplined.
I would rather say passionate.
They're passionate.
Yeah.
But they're passionately doing things that hurt the leader. Is there anything better Susan Lee could handle in terms of the relationship with her colleagues? Or why is this happening?
I think Andrew made it clear that he was doing what he was doing so the leader could be free to do what she needs to do. So I think he made it clear that he wasn't doing it to cause any issues with the leader. Susan's made it clear what her expectations are of her senior team. She's made that clear from the start, and part of that is the policy development process. And Andrew's specifically said that it's in regards to immigration policy why he's stepped aside, and he's had his say, and he had a press conference yesterday. I don't think I've got anything more to add.
It seems to me there's a disrespect from some of your colleagues towards your leader, because Peter Dutton went to the election with net zero and Andrew Hastie didn't resign then.
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of Andrew except to say from his public statement yesterday he was stepping aside out of respect for the leader. In my portfolio, I've got work to do and things to concentrate on, and I'm very happy to take the charter letter and get moving because Australians are expecting us to have policy.
How would you describe the job Susan Lee's done so far?
I think she's been collaborative. She's come in at a very tough time. We're really scraping the bottom, aren't we? Australians are very disappointed in us. So you can't expect that when we're in such a dismal state from parliamentary terms that things are always going to be, bright and fuzzy and we're all having a beautiful time. It's really tough. We're developing policy again in some respects from the very beginning. People rejected us at the last election. Susan has a tough job and her team are all behind her.
All right, let's move to this Optus 000 scandal. Tim Mayer says it's all Optus. It's all their fault.
Come on, this is typical government, hands off. The Minister for Communications left the country. 4 people have died. This is Australians' lives. This isn't just an Optus issue. People could not call 000 in their greatest time of need. They just couldn't do it. So Australians need to have confidence in 000, in our most essential network, and they need to have confidence in the government. And the government is letting Australians down, firstly by the minister leaving, secondly by the minister not acting on the recommendations when Optus first had an outage in 2023, and also by appointing ACMA, the regulator, to investigate when ACMA is part of the failed process. Australians should be asking very serious questions of this minister and of this government and their concern for the Australian people.
What steps could if any, could the government have put in place a couple of years ago which could have prevented this?
Well, there were 18 recommendations that were released a year and a half ago. A year and a half the government's been sitting on the report, and they could have been putting things in place like having a custodian, having a real focus on the whole 000 network, not just Optus. This is about confidence in the whole 000 network. The minister herself has the powers to immediately act. She doesn't need legislation. She just needs sign-off on Cabinet to have an investigation into Optus and do some things about it. Now we're looking in the closing days of Parliament for the year that there'll be rushed legislation because she didn't act and the government didn't act earlier.
Do you think that the government could have done something which would have prevented this? Is that your belief?
I think that's going to be an important question as part of the investigation, that the government has done everything in its power, every single lever. There were warning signs in 2023 when Optus had the first outage, no one died. People died this time. So as I said, this is life and death.
I guess what I'm trying to get to, and look, you don't have to be black and white about it if you don't want, but do you believe it's possible the government is responsible for the deaths of people here?
It was Optus's outage. But the government could have put recommendations into place to ensure the stability of the 000 network.
So
is Optus
could Optus be responsible for?
Well, that's going to come out in the investigation. That's why I'm saying we need a thorough, independent investigation.
Who do you believe should be doing that investigation then?
Well, it should be run by experts. The minister can appoint anyone she wants. I just don't want ACMA to be doing it because they're part of. How can you investigate yourself when you're part of the failed process?
Sure. Well, like a retired judge, or what sort of?
It could be, or experts in telco. It could be a panel. It could be anyone. But ACMA found out about the outage on Thursday. It is by law Optus had to alert ACMA. The minister didn't find out, she says, until Friday. Why didn't the regulator alert the minister? There was a whole day in between, so something failed in that process.
Do you have confidence in Singtel and Optus?
Well, I think Australians are starting to lack confidence in the 000 network, firstly, which is disastrous if that happens, and they're certainly lacking confidence in Optus because of this. This isn't the first time, and it resulted in deaths. Of course, they would be lacking confidence.
The former New South Wales Liberal leader Gladys Berejiklian is part of the Optus senior executive team. We haven't heard from her. Should she be out there explaining what's happened here?
I think the CEO should be out there. The CEO came out and I think spoke to the Australian people maybe once or twice early on and then disappeared. The minister came out once, appointed ACMA, the regulator as investigator, and then shot off overseas when people have died. So there are failures all along the way, and I think...
What about Ms Berejiklian, though? She's Chief Customer Officer, isn't she?
She's not the CEO, though, is she? CEO
she doesn't have to address it publicly, in your view?
The CEO always has the ultimate responsibility. In any crisis, the CEO should step up and claim responsibility, which he did.
I wanted to ask about Palestine. There seems a perception from the federal government their push for statehood actually helped achieve peace if it happens. What do you make of that?
Tell the PM he's dreaming. If he thinks that he had a whole lot of influence, President Trump and the US administration, it seems, were working on this for some time, and they actually publicly said that Australia's position on this was more of a hindrance than a help. So I think the Prime Minister should firstly be focusing on Australians first. He was away when this 000 outage happened as well, but also shouldn't be claiming wins for something that he wasn't particularly involved with.
And what do you make of the prospect of a Palestinian protest on the Opera House forecourt next week?
I think, and I know your guest prior to me said, as long as it's respectful. What respect is there in having a protest around the date when over 1,000 Jews were slaughtered? There's nothing respectful in having a protest at the Opera House, one of our most well-known, recognised icons at that point in time. So I think you were right to ask that question about it being the timing being off. So I hope the New South Wales government uses all its levers to stop that protest happening.
And just finally, back in Canberra for Parliament this week, it is the school holidays and it's a parliamentary sitting week. That's a bit unusual. It happened last year as well. Do you have a view on that?
The Prime Minister promised Australians that the Parliament he leads, the country he leads, would be more family friendly, yet we are being dragged away from our families during school holiday time. So this is another letdown by the PM, another broken promise. We've got to work, all of us work. When we're not in Parliament, we are still working really hard in our portfolios, in our electorates, but pulling people away from their families when you promise not to do that, it's pretty rough.
Melissa McIntosh, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.